Danielle, thank you so much for being part of our fireside chat today. I wanted to start with a story. I have a 7-year-old son, and he is a part of a school where they have a STEM program built into the curriculum, right? So they have STEM projects. I'm about to go to a parent night where the parent and the child are both doing STEM projects together. So I enjoy the fact that this school is making an effort for boys and girls to be part of STEM and to be a normal part of their lives, and for boys and girls to see each other do STEM, right? And so it's just that's their introduction to life. However, there still seems to be some stereotype that STEM is kind of a boy thing, that it's a boy mindset to want to be part of that. So I wanted to ask, did you have to suffer through that stereotype, and why was the STEM world something that you were attracted to?
Yes. So let me start by saying I think all of that just is part of the fabric of our culture. And as time goes on, I think it gets a little better. But I could definitely relate to what you're saying. For me, it was choosing to go into aerospace was just part of my background. It was just felt like a very natural decision. And it was almost an afterthought for me. So I'm lucky in that way that it is a male dominated industry. It was almost like an afterthought because I just grew up on airplanes. And so it was part of my daily being. So in that case, I feel like I'm a little bit of the exception because my normalized world was that this was available to me. There was gender didn't even cross my mind in it. And same for my sister. My sister is actually a pilot. So we all grew up in aerospace, and then, we just can't get away from it. They say aerospace people are very passionate, and it is very true. But I can see what you're saying in terms of like, it's still those stereotypes exist. And even though like we can message and we can encourage, just, it's almost like, can you be what you cannot see? And so if you don't see a lot of women in STEM, then somewhere in their subconscious, girls might think, okay, well, that's not a field for me. And I think to my nieces, I have I have 3 elementary school age nieces, and 2 of them like really want to be teachers. And I think, is that because they see their teachers and they're females and like they have an affection for their teachers? And I think about that and like, well, how can we get them see what other interests they might have that might not be in front of their face, and just exposing them to more. And so I don't know what the answer is there, but I think maybe just acknowledging more that like, some fields are still male dominated, but it makes us all better if more girls get into it. Mm-hmm. And trying to encourage children to follow their interests without those barriers. It's really hard.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to get to how you got to Boeing. I just think that's so neat in a second, but I just wanted to kind of follow up with that, where I now don't think you're the exception. I want you to be the standard, right? Because it's your family environment that introduced you to this. And so it kind of goes with what you're saying, that I'm all for encouraging girls to do these things, but as a mother of a son, I'm also encouraging my son to understand that there's no boy thing, a girl thing, right? And for him to be used to, and attracted to the fact that women can do anything he can do. And we've had that conversation several times. Mm-hmm. And so, talk about the family dynamic and how, you were influenced, and again, how you got to Boeing.
Yes. I am one of 3 girls. So girls ruled my world. And even my cousins, my closest cousins, who we also grew up like siblings, there were essentially 5 girls, and we were all like born the year after each other. So we're very close. So my world is full of girls. And so I almost didn't have that aspect of like, certain things are just for boys, because like I didn't have that frame of reference growing up. I didn't really grow up with a ton of boys. But I got to Boeing. So back to your question, I got to Boeing. I studied finance and accounting in undergrad. For me, I'm a first generation college student, undergrad college student. So for me, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to go to college for, I didn't really know all of the options available for me. And you're so influenced by your parents. And to my parents who never went to college, they're like, well, you need business. You have to go into business. Like that is
Right.
the field to go into. And so I was like, okay, well, I like numbers. I like math. So I'm going to go into business and do accounting and finance. And then when I was in school, loved the classes because I love financing and math. And then when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after college, I was interviewing with all of these typical companies that recruit at business schools, like accounting firms and insurance companies and financial firms. And I was interviewing with all of them, and I had this moment, I'm like, none of this excites me. Like, I don't want to work for these companies and just live in numbers. And I had this moment, I remember vividly on campus. I was standing in line at the coffee shop thinking, oh, what am I going to do? I don't like any of these companies I just interviewed with. And I was like, what am I thinking? Like, I need to stay in aviation. Like growing up, I worked at the local airport. That was my job. I just loved being around airplanes. My grandfather was a pilot. My father's a pilot. And we just always were on the back of some sort of airplane, whether it be like a little 4-seater or an acrobatic airplane or an airliner. You're always on the back of some sort of airplane. And so I was like, why am I interviewing you? So I thought out Boeing. I'm like, okay, well, aerospace, who is a premier company in aerospace? It's Boeing. So I flooded their system with my resume. I applied to almost every entry-level finance job I could find. And I didn't even care where it was. So I got a call one day. And they were like, oh, it's so-and-so from Boeing. Are you still interested in the position you applied for? And I was like, yes. I'm like, but can you please tell me which position this is? And they were like, it's in St. Louis. And I grew up in Connecticut and went to school in Boston. So I'm very much a New Englander. And I was like, okay, I was Googling St. Louis on the side. I'm like, yes, I'm interested. It doesn't even matter where it is. I'm going. So that's how I came to Boeing.
I just, because I come from the media world, and it reminds me of being excited for the first radio station I ever worked at professionally. That was one I was a fan of, right? So it is that, and I think that for a lot of people, they don't give themselves permission to say, look, instead of practically going to this profession, what am I passionate about? And I go into this one. And the other thing you mentioned about family influence too. I love the fact that, you've been in a pool of women and it didn't really dawn on you that there was a difference. And so that proves to anyone who's watching this, who is maybe young and wanting to go into a STEM profession, or someone who is older and wants to pivot to a STEM profession, like, understand that all that mentality you may have of insecurity in your own mind as a woman is learned behavior. It is not natural. That is not how it's meant to be, right? So what advice do you give someone, or mentorship do you give to women when they say, I'm a little intimidated because I'm not sure if it's the right place for me, even though I want to be with STEM?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You need to first understand, like, what kinds of things do you love and do you like? And for me, I loved numbers and I loved aerospace. So I found the intersection of that. And like that, if you can do that analysis of the things you enjoy, then that will help steer you in the right area. And then if you like consider a certain field and then you think you talk yourself back from it saying, well, is it really conducive for women? Am I the right fit for that? I don't know if I'd be competitive in that field. Then that's another thing that's like a whole nother issue. But for me, I think you need to try, right? Like, you need to try somewhere. And it's almost when it can be intimidating to think, well, I need to make the right decision now. And I definitely felt like that when I was in college and going through my schooling. Like, I need to make the right decision because this is my career. I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. But to be honest, like, no, you just try. It's like trial and error. Like I started at Boeing in a rotation program, and I've kind of used that for the rest of my career. Like I try one thing, I see if I like it, I learn a lot about myself, and then I learn more about what I like and don't like, and then try something else. And so just having those guts to try something that might seem intimidating, um, uh, I think is the most important like part of making a career decision. And then when you're in it, like, so this is what happened to me. I'm like, well, I need to be in aerospace. And then when I got in it, I realized, okay, well, there's a lot of gender inequities in aerospace and
Right.
STEM fields. Like it's very male dominated. And then I wanted to be that change agent. So it's motivating me for like being part of the change and wanting to change the industry. So I don't just accept the status quo, which is a hard role and an intimidating role to take. But for young women, like I think if they stay true with their interests and they're willing to take those risks, because no matter what field they're going to enter, they're going to face different challenges, and the gender is just one challenge. The gender issue may be just one challenge they face.
Right.
Um,
Well,
but
and,
if
and
they're
also,
passionate about it,
and not to interrupt, but also, we talk about young women coming up, but there's also, the issue of women in management. Is there anything that you
mm,
seek if there's a woman who's in charge? Because I've heard, women's opinion of women in leadership, both good and bad. So what's your take on that? And if somebody who is a leader in STEM is watching this, what would you tell her to be mindful of maybe in her management style?
oh gosh, you're right. There are so many stereotypes, like negative stereotypes about women in leadership that are very destructive. I think being aware of them is really important because then you can see when they're happening. Um, and then finding women mentors, or even I actually women and male mentors who can help navigate like your personal leadership style amongst all of these challenges. Like for instance, women leaders, like if they're too aggressive and that's negatively perceived, whereas if a male is aggressive, then that's like
He's
a
assertive.
positive attribution.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly right.
assertive. Like he's a go-getter. Like he
Yeah.
gets things done. But if a woman has those same attributes, then they're like, oh well, she's too aggressive. She's unapproachable. She's
Right.
abrasive. So being aware of those things, I think, is definitely important. But in the end, I think leadership, it comes down to relationships. And so building good relationships with the people you work for and the people who work with you and the people you work with, like all around, help knock down those stereotypes. Because
Yeah.
if people get to know you more, then they're less likely to assign stereotypes to you.
Mhm.
And it's and part of building those relationships is being vulnerable and telling your stories and acknowledging your unique management styles.
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge too that, we are obviously because of women in STEM leadership are focused on women, but, I think that, for men who are watching, it's this idea that, why is it, so what that there's so many men in certain industries? So what? Well, you know, up until this point, the men have not always been inclusive. Men have not always been respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Men have not always just assumed the woman knows what she's doing and it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But like to my point earlier about raising my own son and hoping that men are raised in an environment where why does it have to be us and them? Why can't, we're building toward an inclusivity, and that includes men too, right? So
Right.
hopefully as we
Yeah.
move forward that
Sure.
just it would be great to be in an environment where, oh, it's mostly women, it's no big deal. Oh, it's mostly men, it's no big deal, where that's not an issue. But right
Mm-hmm.
now it still is an issue. Um, one of the things that women in STEM leadership is excited about is the partnership with Boeing. And so I was hoping maybe before we end our conversation, if you could explain to me why you think women in STEM leadership as a group is important to have and for people to have it as a resource.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, where do I begin? There's so many reasons. STEM, just think about all of the great things that have come out of the STEM fields in our lives, like everything. Like just look around you, like everything comes from the STEM field. And then think about like, okay, that came from a mostly male dominated, historically a male dominated um, in, industries. There's a whole, I mean, the business case for having women in any field is just super strong. But I think there's so much, there's a statistic out there that if we achieved gender equity, it could add trillions of dollars to the global economy. So
Wow.
that's true for any business, any sector. So if you just get to a more equitable state, you are unlocking a lot of value. So that's one big important piece of it. And the other piece of why this is so important is just it's hard. It's acknowledging it's harder to be a woman in STEM fields and in certain sectors and industries, and it really needs a support network because it's easy to some days feel defeated, and you need to know that you're not alone. Even if you're the only woman in your team or in your work group, you're in the bigger picture, you're not alone. And being able to share those experiences and be able to share data and information, like a lot of this to me, for making progress relies on awareness.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know, like a lot of men, I've encountered a lot of men that I've worked with, and they just don't, there's no maliciousness behind it. They just aren't fully like aware of the data and the impacts and the microaggressions that go on and what makes it hard. And so organizations like Women in STEM Leadership just help that awareness.
Yeah.
I think that, and for me, that was true too. Even if you're a woman, it helps to be more aware too. Like going back to your one of your original stories and questions is that sometimes you're not even aware why you're leaning towards one field or the other, and just having a heightened awareness is important. I remember during my graduate studies, I took a course on diversity and inclusion. And I was already a proponent for women in aerospace, right? Because I loved aerospace when I got here and I realized the inequities that exist here. And then and I'm not saying at Boeing, like just in general in the sector. And then I wanted to change it. And then I took a diversity course at my graduate studies, and it completely like opened my mind to all of the other inequities that exist for marginalized groups. And it was almost like this light bulb moment where I then had more awareness. And so then it motivated me even more to change. So I think groups like this and conversations like this help that awareness in little bits and pieces. And if we do more of that, then maybe it'll add up and propel change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was trying to think of a STEM analogy, and binary came to mind. Like you can't have binary without the ones and the O's. So why would you just have one gender over another? I mean, I think it's just really understanding that you need, because it shouldn't be all women either. I tell my son, like, when I defend women on certain things, it's like, but I say the same for boys. It shouldn't be, nobody should be left out. Everybody should be included because there's incredible value in men and there's incredible value in women. It's just, we're trying to shine the light on that ladder, more. So, Danielle, thank you so much for this conversation. One last question, is there anything else we haven't covered or anything that you would tell, your younger self, or maybe a woman who didn't have what sounds like a wonderful upbringing that you had, where she may not understand that she can do anything?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And just a side note, when you talk about my son, I have a 1-year-old son, so I think about these things too. Like I never imagined, because I grew up with only girls, I never imagined actually being a boy mom and raising a boy. And I think about, okay, well, gender equity needs to happen with all conversations need to happen with all genders. But to young girls, and I think to my nieces, just you need to do what makes you happy. And just experimenting and getting experiences and doing different things will help you understand what makes you happy. And at the end of the day, you want to find fulfillment and happiness in your work. And I think even exploring arts or whatever it is, just explore lots of different things and just explore it a little more each time. And no matter what you choose, you're going to face challenges in different fields. Those challenges may be gender related, but there's a way through it, and it's a chance to be a trailblazer and to make something better around you. And that's really cool. That's really powerful.
Oh, I love that. And I think I'm inspired by, again, how you talked about wanting to work at Boeing and then applying to all these jobs. It's almost like if you're someone who is older and pivoting, you don't have to be young to have that motivation, right?
Oh,
So it's almost like do the same
totally.
thing, like find the company or the industry that makes you
Hmm.
smile and then just splay your applications out. I just love that story. So, Danielle, thank you so
Yeah.
much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thanks to Boeing for their partnership with Women in STEM Leadership.
Yeah. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Melissa, for the chat. It's been fun.